Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Beyond Demographics, Exploring Cultural Attitudes in New Markets. My name is Jason Partridge. I'm the VP Client Success at Lux Research, and I'm also the co-founder of Lux Motive Base. I'm going to be moderating today's session. Presenting today is my colleague, Ujwal Arkel-Good. He's the EVP and Group Director at Lux Research, and he also just happens to be my co-founder at Lux Motive Base. Throughout this webinar, you can type any questions you have into the question box on your screen. And time permitting, we're going to work to answer all of the questions that we get asked today. But if for some reason a question doesn't get answered, please don't hesitate to email us at questions@luxresearchinc.com. That's questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we will be quick to respond and reply. So we've got a lot to get through today. I'm very excited about this. So at this point, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Ujwal, and let's start the presentation.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jason. Hi, everybody. This is a topic that is very, very near and dear to our hearts because, you know, the obsession with corporate research around demographics has been sort of a constant challenge for us, mainly because as anthropologists, we see the flaws and we see the missed opportunities almost on a day-to-day basis. And this is really an opportunity for us to dig into why we try to make the case of needing to go beyond demographics. Why do cultural attitudes, consumer belief systems, human belief systems, why do they perhaps matter more? And why are demographics a byproduct of the research we do, not the driver of the research we do? Those are the things we're really going to dig in today. And we're going to also put this into the context of global research, because this is another context where demographics also become a huge point of risk, especially from an innovation standpoint, because I think increasingly we're all tasked with coming up with ideas and solutions that have global applicability. And it's very easy to take the wrong lens and restrict our own aperture, or sort of narrow our own lens onto the landscapes that we look at. So we'll talk a little bit about how that's something that we can all avoid and why it's important to avoid it. But before I do that, I just want to set the stage and just define anthropology, or do a bit of a crash course. For those of you who have attended some of our webinars before, this will be a bit of repetition, but I think it's important to set the foundation to say, why do we do cultural anthropology? Why does it matter so much, especially in the world of corporate research and innovation? It matters because if you take a step back and think about one of the greatest developments in human history, i.e. the development of language, you'll realize that actually language, the words we use in context, are nothing but pointers. Language is used as a way to point at ideas. Some ideas are conceptual, at things that are more tangible, but ultimately language is a pointer. Even in fact, as babies, we learn about things and concepts and ideas around us by literally pointing to those things and figuring those things out. So language is a pointer. Why is this notion of a pointer so important? Because language, and when I say language, by the way, I don't just mean a single word. I mean a group of words. Sometimes a set of words create a concept, and that pointer helps us give meaning to ideas around us in culture and society. So, classic example, I have this Apple iPhone in front of me. There's so much meaning associated with the Apple iPhone beyond just being a phone and having certain functionality. The brand Apple and the history around it and Steve Jobs' legacy, all of that carries so much meaning. And if you were to analyze this sort of thought bubble popping up above my head as I think about and get joy from this device, even though I technically know that perhaps the previous Android device I used to use was far more technically adept as a piece of software than the iOS device, why is it that I get so much joy from this device? If you looked at that thought bubble, you would realize and see all of this meaning. The challenge, though, is that as humans, we struggle to articulate all of that meaning. And in fact, to illustrate that point, I have a simple example in front of you where the topics in green represent what we call the explicit meanings that we associate with ideas. So if you're talking about gut health, We might explicitly connect gut health to weight loss or immune function. But what really concerns us as cultural anthropologists is to get at the stuff that is implicit, the associations of the associations. Now, here's why this becomes so important, because more than 70% of the meanings we ascribe to the world around us are implicit. So literally, more than 70% of the meanings are associations of associations, all the stuff that is not in light green. And as cultural anthropologists that do or study language and meaning by scraping and studying millions and millions of human interactions on the internet, it becomes really powerful for us, because not only can we now identify these associations of associations, we can also quantify them and identify clusters and systems of meaning that are shaping and giving meaning and shaping the future of ideas and trends that matter to your business. Okay, so this is really where cultural anthropology becomes really powerful. Now, how does this apply into the context of demographics and a discussion of demographics? Now, here's why it's important. Turns out, if you take, let's stick to that idea of gut health as an example. If you look at the way in which language plays out around a topic like gut health, what you'll find is at the core, at the most explicit side of the boundary, right? The most explicit connections are also the most logical connections people make. So around gut health, you may see discussions about probiotics, about supplements, things like that. They're very logical associations. So it turns out the core, if you look at how language plays out, the core of any idea is the most logical interpretation of that idea. And it's also made up of people who are very, very in tune with that idea. So people who are incorporating gut health into their daily lives and certainly have a better understanding or are generally closer to the core. Okay, so at the core, you've got the most logical meanings. Now, as you move further along, you get what we call the contextual meanings. So this is the association of the association. Like in the example I showed you before, this is where you will find that, the connection to one idea extends into a connection into another idea. For example, gut health extends to immunity. Immunity extends to chronic health conditions. Chronic health is an example of a contextual meaning. Now, this contextual meaning is critical because it teaches us about how the space of gut health is evolving, but it also shows us how new people discover gut health. Because turns out people discuss new ideas through adjacent and contextual landscapes. So let's imagine that chronic health conditions then extends into the culture and discussion of wellness. Somebody is engaging around wellness in the adjacent space. Through that, they get attracted to a discussion about chronic health, and through that, they get attracted to a discussion about gut health. So it turns out how human beings discover new ideas is from the outside in, and how ideas shape is from the inside out. Okay, so this is the interesting part. We discover ideas from the outside in. So it's critical for us to understand the adjacent and contextual meanings shaping the future of any idea, because that's how new people discover trends. Now, here's the other piece that's very, very interesting for us to understand in this context as well. Okay. If you think about culture, it is nothing but a fabric of meaning. Culture is a fabric of meaning, and we human beings use this fabric of meaning to make sense of the world around us. Okay, so this is culture. We use this fabric of meaning to make sense of the world around us. Okay, so it turns out, if I take the core of an idea, let's say the topic here is sustainable cleaning, okay? Then I look at the contextual landscape around it, and it's waste reduction. Then I look at the broader adjacent landscape, and that's around natural cleaning. If I start paying attention to this, I will realize that actually the demographics of this idea, and again, I'll go back in my beautiful slide projection transitions here. The demographic makeup of sustainable cleaning may be X. As the culture of waste reduction gets attached to it, it becomes X plus Y. As the culture of natural cleaning gets attracted to it, it may become X plus Y minus Z. The reason I'm explaining this to you is the demographics around an idea are constantly evolving. The idea is still the same. It's still sustainable cleaning, but the meaning around it is evolving. And because the meaning is evolving, the people who flock to that idea are also changing and evolving. This is how culture changes, evolves. Again, you begin with a core idea like sustainable cleaning. It's got a logical interpretation. It's got a particular makeup of demographics. And as that culture evolves and matures, it brings new people. And by the way, it eliminates certain people as well. So the makeup, the demographic makeup of a culture, of a topic is constantly evolving. And this is critical for us to understand. So what does that teach us? It teaches us that demographics are the byproduct of the development of meaning in culture. Demographics don't create meaning. It's not like a bunch of millennials flock to sustainable cleaning and change the meaning of sustainable cleaning and extend it into waste and natural cleaning. No. Sustainable cleaning has its own meaning, and just through the natural development of language, it evolves. And as it evolves, the demographics around it evolve. That's just how culture happens. If you ask me why, I mean, I can talk about theory here on why that happens, but the reality is that's just what happens. And we've observed this now for more than 8 years, looking at billions and billions of topic relationships contextually. And this is how culture evolves. Okay, so now let's put this into a very tangible context and try to understand exactly how all of this can play out when we start to put this into the context of the research work we do. Okay, so on your screen, what you're seeing is, we call it a simple hierarchy model, but you're seeing the core themes and the demand drivers shaping sustainable cleaning, okay? And you're looking at the entire landscape today. Now, what you'll find is there are 4 themes. There's meaning associated with sustainable cleaning that's about natural. There's meaning around waste, meaning around efficacy, around healthier homes. Healthier homes extends into demand around hormone disruptors and air quality. Efficacy extends into demand around safety and surface protection, and so on and so on. This overall landscape has a certain natural skew from a demographic perspective. It tends to skew middle-class consumers without children, mostly university educated, okay? And this can be quantified. This is the overall skew of the culture. Now, here's where things become very, very interesting. Let's say I isolate just the culture of natural within the context of sustainable cleaning. What happens? When I isolate natural, the demographics change, because the people who associate and see the world through the lens of natural are slightly different. It's a subsection of the overall landscape of sustainable cleaning, right? So when I isolate natural, now I find, yes, not only will my core market size shrink, but it will also change the demographic makeup. And now it alienates parents and focuses on households with people under the age of 55 without children, okay? Now let me do the same. Now I'm going to isolate just waste reduction. Turns out it naturally attracts people who have children and university educated. So that's different. So what are we realizing here? That demographic patterns are a constant outcome of shared meaning. Not only are they not the drivers, they're also constantly changing, just like shared meaning is changing. So as meaning is changing around an idea, the demographic patterns around it are changing as well. And this is why we measure demographics as an outcome of culture. We study a culture, we study the meanings, and then we explore the demographic makeup at a given point in time. And we revisit the demographic makeup as time changes and meaning changes, because the demographics change. And that's just the reality of culture. So why is this important? Now imagine if you had a project where you were trying to tackle a problem around sustainable cleaning, but you had a very specific demographic lens. You said, hey, I'm XYZ brand. I'm going to only target, parents with young children in the middle classes and above. What would happen is, because you have predefined the demographic boundary, you now go into research and you only see half of the picture. You don't see the narrative around natural. You don't see it because you restricted your own aperture You don't see the narrative around healthier home and how it connects into air quality and opportunities around hormone disruption and all of that. Instead, all you see is the narratives and the meanings around waste reduction and the meanings around efficacy. Now, you might say, why? What's wrong with that? That's fine, because my focus was the specific demographic. The problem is it's not fine because culture and meaning is constantly changing and evolving. If you've missed half of the picture, not only have you missed, first of all, demographics are never mutually exclusive, right? So there's always overlap. So now you're missing parts of the population. Secondly, because you've missed a whole half of the cultural landscape that might shape the future of your industry, you are also missing the opportunity to proactively think through new opportunities and new developments that you might want to make so that you're constantly evolving your product as you develop. Now, this problem becomes even worse when you put all of this on the global scale. Why? Because let's imagine that in every country you now encounter, you're taking this demographic lens, right? So you're going, oh, I only care about, families with younger children who are middle classes and above, okay? So you go to country number one and you see one part of the narrative. You go to country number two, you see a different part of the narrative. You go to country number three, now you see a completely different part of the narrative. The problem is, not only are you now seeing disparate parts and pieces of the narrative from different countries, it's also preventing you from being able to do a proper apples to apples comparison and analysis of any landscape. And oftentimes, I think, especially if you're a global organization, the challenge you face is, especially in R&D and in innovation, you have to develop ideas and solutions that have global application. So often, even when we work with our clients, we're tasked with, while we're studying markets differently because each have different cultural nuances, our goal is to try to figure out if there is in fact shared narratives and shared opportunities and needs developing. But if you're seeing only subsections of different parts of each culture, the chance of you finding a narrative that is naturally emerging, that is shared across these landscapes is not only shorter or smaller, but it's also then forcing you into a space where you're kind of forcing your hand and forcing the opportunities even when they don't naturally exist and don't surface in the same way. So what's happening here? You're actually making or increasing the risk in the work you do because you took demographics as the defining starting point in the work you do, as opposed to letting it naturally bubble to the top and then figuring out, which landscapes could I go to that might work, that might not work. So this is why I come back to the underlying idea and the underlying statement we made when we began this session. To fully grasp the complexity of culture, it is essential to understand that demographics do not dictate cultural norms and ideas. Demographics are a byproduct, and they're constantly evolving as meaning changes. So the ideal way to approach, right? What is the human-centered way to approach a project like this? Let's talk about that. Surprise, surprise, start with meaning. Begin by asking the question, what does X mean in each market and culture, right? Ask the question, what does X mean? Ask the question, what does sustainable cleaning mean in the US, in the UK, in France, in Germany, in China, in India, in Japan? Ask the question, what does X mean? Look at the natural associations, so the natural clusters of meaning, as we talked about, that are naturally emerging in each market. Understand which ones are more significant, because you might definitely have outcomes where, so for example, if you think about that space around the healthier home and the opportunity around people's concern with hormone disruption, you might find that that's a bigger concern in the US, smaller concern in France. It's important to understand those associations and understand the significance of them. And then to understand the specific language map. So, because you'll find that in each country, because the contextual cultural context is different, the language people use to express these ideas are also different, sometimes subtly different, sometimes significantly different. Sometimes you go, a 2-hour drive between France and Spain, and you'll find the difference is significantly palpable. So it's critical for us to understand what those language differences are. The second step is to then, once you understand meaning, to move from meaning to behavior, and that's where you get your demographics, right? So understand meaning, then understand motivations, understand the localized interpretation, because when you understand the localized interpretation, you can then figure out not just how to prioritize within each geography, but how to then look at all those prioritizations in context to pull out the shared language, the shared meaning, the shared opportunities. But if you don't follow this step, you're going to miss out opportunities, and you're going to be comparing an orange to an apple and ending up in a scenario like I illustrated earlier, where you're kind of forcing the situation to try and land at a common outcome rather than looking at things that naturally bubble to the surface. And this is the difference between taking an industry first approach and not even realizing it versus a truly human-centered approach, right? So taking a demographic approach is, in fact, taking a human-centered approach. Even though you think, oh, no, I'm thinking about human demographics, I'm putting the human at the center. It is human-centered. It's not. Because the moment you do that, you make the assumption that as human beings, we set clear boundaries. I know this is a silly example, but some of my closest friends are 10 years older than I am. And I jokingly say part of it is by design, because it makes me feel young all the time. But jokes aside, I think the important point is, why are we friends if we're 10 years apart? Because we share values, we share beliefs, we share interests and hobbies and ideas. This is very much true of all of us in our lives. My oldest friend is 68 years old. How could that be the case? They're 3 years younger than one of my parents. How could that be the case? I think we have to realize that as human beings, we don't put arbitrary boundaries. We don't go, oh, you're not a millennial, I cannot be friends with you. I cannot share ideas with you. I cannot learn from you. I cannot be influenced by your beliefs and ideas. So we have to put to bed this old school mentality, and this mentality of going by demographics is not only restrictive, but risky. So here's a very, very tangible example of what happens when we avoid taking a demographic first approach and lead with beliefs. So I'm giving you a very tangible example. We're looking at the landscape of skincare here, and we're comparing beliefs in China versus beliefs in the United States. And I just wanted to illustrate to you what happens when we go beliefs first. So meaning first, and then figure out where the natural connective tissue is with demographics. So just again, very quickly, TCM-based skincare. So, one of the things you'll find is that this idea of a holistic approach comes up both in the US and in China. But in China, the holistic approach is a balance between internal and external. Whereas in the US, it's about mental and physical. Subtle but significant difference. And by the way, the demographics are also slightly different between the consumer in the US and China who take a holistic approach. Personalization, slightly different. It's about epigenetics, heavily in the US, more about individual skin conditions and customization in China. With tech, it's about high-tech devices and efficiency in China, and it's about AI and DNA tests for personalization in the US. So you can see here there's subtle but significant differences, and what you'll find is in each of these landscapes, the demographics as an outcome of the belief are subtly different. Some cases significantly different, some cases subtly different. Now, if I did this analysis across 3-4 other markets, I can easily pull out specific areas of demand, like demand around ingredient quality, or demand around clean skincare, or demand around personalization, and then find the common threads between countries and look at the common demographics and the shared demographics that come as a result of it. But the power of this approach is it allows us to go meaning first, which means we design products and solutions that attack the underlying reasons why people care about a product, rather than trying to attack some kind of arbitrary definition of demographics. And then when we attack the shared belief, the shared meaning that people hold around an idea, we automatically create more global relevancy. And if the demographics of who we cater to are naturally evolving, what is the problem with that? We need to understand and be okay with that. And I think part of this is a shift, because we are actually putting our own business at risk part of this is also a cultural shift within our organizations, because it does mean we have to start to think a bit differently about how culture and human beings and their needs evolve and change with time. So what are the takeaways I want to leave you with? First and foremost, demographic first analysis puts your business at risk. To drive growth, you have to begin with meaning first. There is no other way around it. Most trends are not global. It turns out, like the example I showed you around skincare, while the themes are the same, the interpretations, localized interpretations, are subtly different and significantly different in some cases. It is rare to find a trend that is in fact global. I think we have to get over this idea that a trend is global. Yes, the theme may have global relevancy, but if the interpretation is quite nuanced and different, it isn't global, is it? And I think this is the part we also have to get over. And if we get over that fact, then we'll also become more comfortable with this idea that we have to find common threads and weave them together in order to create efficiencies. And then the last takeaway, just to bring this all together, is the same topic can have different needs. Just as I illustrated in the skincare example, the same topic or same trend has a slightly different interpretation, which means it can have a different need and can carry a different demographic makeup. So when we lead with meaning first, we open our organizations and our businesses to understand how demographics are naturally shaping up, how trends are naturally shaping up, and we ensure that we take a human-centered approach first and then try to bring the operational efficiency needs after to try and weave a common narrative together. Jason, over to you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Ujwal. I am now realizing that you probably planned this entire webinar just to point out the fact that you're more than 10 years younger than I am. But let me jump in with a couple of questions. Just as a reminder to everybody, I'm going to try and get through as many of the questions as we can, but if we don't get through them, don't worry, please email us or we'll reach out if you put something into the chat. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because it kind of segues off of what you were just talking about, Uj. Somebody wrote, what I'm hearing is that when we lead with demographics, we're leaving money on the table. Can you just expand a little bit on that notion to confirm that that's correct and just talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And, I think I'll try to jump back to one of the earlier slides I had. I think the problem, like this slide, the problem I'm trying to illustrate and bring to life is that we have no way to control the demographic makeup behind trends and ideas. They just happen naturally. There's just no way to control it. So what happens is when we restrict something we're pursuing to a demographic, we unknowingly restrict a portion of the population. I think let me put it this way. Let's say the color green is very trendy in North America. And men wear the color green in North America. In Europe, not only is green not trending, it's more popular among women, okay? I'm a brand and I really, really, really care about men. I'm catering to men. I have products that only cater to men. And I'm very specifically going after and studying only men in these markets. What happens? The takeaway for me is, green is really relevant in the US, but blue is really relevant in Europe. I can't do anything with this. What do I do? They're so different. Instead, if I'd reverse that and ask the question, what is the meaning that people hold around color? Why do people flock to one color versus the other? And then seeing how this makeup of culture and society naturally shapes and where men naturally form, I may realize that actually there is a connective tissue with turquoise that really works on a global scale. And I know I'm simplifying this example, but I'm using it just to illustrate the point that I think we don't realize how restrictive sometimes we can be because of the lens we apply onto our businesses. And I think we have to be very, very careful because not only are we leaving money on the table today, I think we are now in a place where foresight is becoming increasingly important. I don't think, Jason, we have a single client that isn't implementing a foresight program or already has a foresight program for the last couple of years.
Yes.
Especially through that lens. Imagine completely being in the dark around half or 3/4 of a cultural landscape that's shaping the future of your business.
Yeah, it's such a great example, Ujwal. It also reminds me of work that we've done in the casual dining space, and the focus on more premium opportunities with more established and older consumers. And by identifying kind of the overarching desire and need for finding ways to pamper oneself with dining experiences, starting to basically kind of descend into younger and younger audiences, seeing university students that were choosing not to go partying on a Thursday night, but instead that were actually taking their budget and using it as an act of defiance and sophistication, right? Because there was a shared belief around the need to go have that experience. And so in that particular instance, the assumption around that it only pertains to kind of older groups of consumers that fit a certain economic profile means that we were actually ignoring the potential to make inroads with brand new consumers that were just starting to engage with these types of brands. So I think that it's always really, really important to go back to that notion of meaning first, followed by then understanding where do the demographics fall, and then getting to that deeper reason of why, which I think is really, really, really important. So the next question, Uj, is really around this whole notion of what's going on at organizations. I'm going to reword this a little bit because I want to make sure that we're I want to expand it because it kind of pertains to like 2 or 3 questions that we got. But really, if I had to really kind of define the question, what is driving organizations to lead with demographics? Why is that kind of the low branch, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, the philosophical answer is, we didn't have any other way in the past, right? So if you just simply think about it, pre-internet, how did we do research? We did surveys. And we did some focus groups, some ethnography. We followed some people around, which meant we had to recruit people, which meant we needed to define who we are recruiting, which meant we needed to care about demographics, right? So that's the history behind it. Now, the reason I said it's a philosophical answer is, as human beings, we find anything that is new risky. That's just human nature, right? We also find anything that is new stressful. And we often, especially in times like these, where I think as insights and innovation professionals, we are facing more stress and more pressure than we've ever faced before, because now we're not just tasked with solving the problem for our industry, we also have to pay attention to all these adjacent industries because there's all these other trends that are disrupting us. And then on top of that, there's startups coming in and taking mind share and market share away from us and everything in between. So in that environment, the last thing we want to do is have another stressor to say, oh, I need to change the process internally. I need to change the mentality internally of people. So there are 2 things we've seen. So have we seen, and I'm extending this question, so bear with me, Jason. One part is, have we seen examples of people doing this successfully? 100%. I think this is one of the biggest shifts that's happening, but the shift is also accompanied with a structural shift. The structural shift is the money shouldn't come from the brand. The money has to come from R&D, from insights, from innovation. Why do I say that? If the money comes from brand, if the brand is funding the work, the brand has a target. That's just the reality. And brand says, oh, well, I only cater to Gen Z in urban areas, and you have no choice but to do that. But if the money's coming from R&D, R&D generally has a more open aperture and says, okay, I'm trying to solve problems around the future of X. So that's one piece. So one is structural. The second piece is certain industries are leading the way that are undergoing more disruption because they're getting disrupted. They have no choice but to think differently. So if you work in industries that are going through less disruption, as an example, skincare is one of those industries. Like, as much as there's competition, there also isn't skincare and please don't take this the wrong way. But if I compare the food CPG industry to the skincare industry, there's significantly more innovation and significantly more push happening in the food CPG than there is in skincare. It's just the reality of it. And you might say, why is that? There's just significantly more innovation and more structural change in personal care, personal care and food CPG than there is in skincare CPG. So it's also at the industry level. So if you belong to an industry where that change hasn't happened yet and it's a bit of a push, part of this is it will take time. So what is the baby step you take? The baby step you take is you educate. And the best way to educate people is through research. And so how do you do that? Do a piece of research where you start with meaning. Take it on the road. Educate people, educate your bosses, bring other stakeholders along. It will not happen overnight. Things may not change in a month, but they will in 6. We've seen it time and time again. But the process of education has to begin somewhere. And another great example is some of our clients will do an XY comparison. They'll take a traditional approach and they'll take a start with meaning approach, and they'll show the difference and the impact it can have on insights and R&D. So I think broadly it's an issue of risk management, but I think it's make or break right now. I mean, I can't believe we're still talking about this and it's almost 2024. Yeah. But it's make or break because the pressures aren't going away. And I think, especially with the development of AI, the tools in front of us are just incredible. We have no choice but to evolve.
Thanks so much, Uj. That actually did an amazing job of answering 2 additional questions that were here. So I'm going to hit pause on the questions at this point. There were a couple more in the window. Somebody's going to reach out in regards to those because they're just a little too complex for kind of what we can cover off today. But Ujwal, I just wanted to basically say thank you. That was amazing. This is going to conclude our webinar for today, and the slide presentation and recording from this is going to get sent to all of the attendees. After leaving the webinar, you're going to get prompted with a survey for today's presentation. So if you could please provide some feedback, it really does help us as we're looking to inform and think about topics for the future. So thank you very much. And the last thing I'll say is that please take a look to just take a gander at these upcoming webinars that we have coming down the pipe. If they're of interest, please make sure that you lock them into your calendar, and we look forward to chatting with you soon. Thank you very much, Ujwal.
Jason, in particular, I wanted to call out the Finding the Sweet Spot of Packaging Innovation webinar, which I'm very excited about. It is actually a result of a collaborative piece of research between our technical analysts and our anthropologists. And you'll have the Lux Motive Base research director, Derek, joining for that webinar as well. So very, very excited about that because it allows us to bring together both the technical side and the human-centric side together in a single webinar. So just wanted to call that out on November 14th.
Derek is also much younger than I am. Thank you very, very much, everybody, for attending today. Take care.